Welcome to the Media Storm studio. A story broke this week in The Guardian. An asylum seeker with the pseudonym Kim was approached by a debt collection agency and handed a £10,000 NHS bill for giving birth. She'd had to have an emergency caesarean section, and those do not come cheap.
Asylum seekers are given an average of £7 per day to survive. They are also not allowed to legally work under UK asylum rules. Well, Kim is joining us on Media Storm today via Zoom as she is taking care of a small child in Bradford. Welcome to the studio, Kim. Firstly, can you tell us, how did you cope when you first received this bill, learning you had to pay £10,000 while living off an asylum seeker's allowance?
So, first of all, I was shocked. Like, how did I get charged? And I'm like, because I was supposed to give like a normal birth. So when I gave like a cesarean, I was like, they should have just left me maybe like that. I didn't want the cesarean because it seems to be more expensive. That, like it's those thoughts. And then I'm thinking like, where am I going to get all this money? And I'm an asylum seeker. This bill keeps adding on. There's one that came before I'd given birth. I was charged, and then now I'm charged again. It was really, really stressful. My baby was still small and was still breastfeeding. In me, like in my culture, I believe like when you're breastfeeding, that energy, that stress, you're supposed to avoid stress because you're breastfeeding to the child. So it was all my worry to say, the child, me, what's going to happen? Are they going to remove me from this house? Because now I owe them a lot. That was my main worry. It was so stressful. And thinking that they might return me back to Africa or something like that, because I cannot afford that 10,000 but plus the 3,650 that they said. So it was too much because the baby was still small. So how am I going to be able to buy everything and pay them at the same time? And I don't have a bank account, so it was so stressful.
Now, as an asylum seeker, Kim is not actually supposed to have to pay these NHS charges that target most migrants. But she's not alone in being hit with them anyway. Today, charities, including Maternity Action and the National Childbirth Trust, are calling for an urgent review of NHS charging for migrants. Which brings us to our second guest, Judith Dennis, Head of Policy at Maternity Action, which works for the rights of pregnant women and new parents, irrespective of migration status. Hello, Judith.
Hello.
In the UK, the topic of migration and the NHS, it's a very sticky issue. And we will get into it in more detail, but let's start with the specifics here. Judith, is it standard practice to charge refugees and asylum seekers thousands of pounds for life-saving and reproductive care? How big a problem is this actually?
The government policy is to charge those who are not ordinarily resident in the UK, but there are exemptions for people in certain circumstances, including those who've made a claim for asylum, as you've said. But as we've seen through Kim's experience, the rules aren't always applied correctly. At Maternity Action, we help women who've been charged either to challenge the rules, as NCT helped Kim, or to agree reasonable payment plans, or where the woman has no funds. Sometimes we're helping them to ask for the debt to be written off. We're talking about women who live in this country and who don't have the means to pay. We don't think that women should be charged for maternity care. We've seen how frightening it is, but equally, some of those women are wrongly charged.
Thank you for clarifying. And you mentioned there the NCT who had helped Kim. That's the National Childbirth Trust. And they did indeed help Kim to have her billing corrected. So we're pleased to say Kim is not having to deal with that debt today anymore.
Now, a 2022 report by the charity Doctors of the World revealed that over a third of migrant women are being charged to give birth, some up to £14,000, and many, as you've pointed out, mistakenly. Women who have been affected by these charges report serious mental health issues arising from these charges. Some have been evicted from housing, others moved and even deported whilst pregnant, despite official protected periods. Vulnerable women are forced to avoid seeking help for their pregnancy, risking their lives at fear of being charged thousands by the NHS. And 3/4 of migrant mothers who lost their babies and needed an interpreter didn't get one and had to navigate that heartbreaking trauma terrified and alone. These are just some of the stories that we are not seeing portrayed in the mainstream media. Kim, I wonder if you can tell us, did your migration status in any way endanger the health and safety of your baby during pregnancy, during birth, or afterwards?
Yes, because I feared being charged again. When I was pregnant, I was admitted into the hospital. So when I stayed there, they continued with other tests. They didn't find any diagnosis. I came out and then I saw the bill. So I was like, you know what? I cannot register. How am I going to register the pregnancy? They are already charging me this money. And if I delayed more, it was going to harm the child, because I was fearing, where am I going to get all this money? But at first I was so scared.
Mommy!
It was putting the pregnancy at risk. I remember the time when I was pregnant, there was a lot of Zimbabweans that were sent back. Lots, like in one time they were just being deported. I said, no, I cannot be deported as well.
Can you explain to us, Judith, what kind of supports are in place for pregnant asylum seekers, and what would Maternity Action recommend on top of this?
I mean, apart from the fact that the charging issue is clearly putting lots of stress on women like Kim, the asylum system does as well. You know, women seeking asylum are here because it's not safe for them to be in their own country. So already they've had a lot of difficulty in their lives. The fear of being sent back, we can hear from Kim's experience and those other women that we work with, and the fear of having to rely on the government for all their support and not knowing where they're going to be placed means that, as well as combined with the fact that Black and minoritized women often have poorer health outcomes. So we'd really like to see the focus on the health of the women, particularly when they're pregnant. The biggest issue really for the women in the asylum system is where they're accommodated, often housed in hotels, access to very little money, very little cash. They can't cook for themselves. They don't have any choice about where they're living. So it's really a lottery. Some of the women with whom we work have access to amazing specialist teams of midwives. I think the problem is that women are either housed in isolated hotels where they're the only pregnant woman, they don't really have very much support. We'd like to see them be a priority for longer term appropriate accommodation where they can have their baby, come back from hospital and look after their baby and do what every mother wants to do and concentrate on that early motherhood and recovering from what's often a traumatic birth. I would just say that the refugee charity Maternity Action and the Home Office jointly worked on some guidance back in 2016 around the care of pregnant women and new mothers. That's all really fallen away when women have been housed in hotels. So yes, we'd just like to see that prioritised a bit more.
Absolutely. And you know what, Judith, that is such an important point. And on that point, there is this common myth that is pervasive in the media that asylum seekers come to live in luxury hotels for free. We actually broke down a Daily Mail example of that on yesterday's episode. Kim, you are currently living in asylum accommodation. Can you tell us what it is actually like in your experience and what it's like living there with a small child?
I've been dispersed about 5 houses in different areas. Currently where I am living, like the living conditions, they are not how people say we're living in luxury for free and everything. It's not like that. Like this accommodation that I live in, there's cockroaches everywhere. They've done 2 heat treatments, nothing helps. No matter how much cleaning and where the child, because my daughter is asthmatic, we are not living in luxury like that. The properties will be falling apart. I remember one time out of my room when I was coming out, the light and the ceiling just fell down. So I'm thinking, like, what if I'd opened the door and my daughter came out first? We are being told, yeah, it's a luxury. People are living in hotels. Even the one that live in the hotels, you go out, you're supposed to come back at this certain time. It's not a luxury because it's more of a prison with the hotels. If you're not back at this time, or if you go and visit a friend, don't come back the next day tomorrow. That's not a luxury. There's rules that are put in place where you cannot go and do as you please. So you're seeking asylum. It's like, I should have stayed in my country maybe and be in prison by being an asylum seeker, by being a new mom, you've got a newborn. Why should we get such treatment? We do appreciate that we have been given a refuge. We do appreciate 100%. We've been given refuge. We are being assisted. The food is there. There's housing. There's electricity. There's all that. But then it's those things like, where there's cockroaches and nothing's being done about it. Like, we are 8 ladies there with their kids. So it's 16 of us living in that house. We're sharing 3 bathrooms. So there's bound to be infections. So it's not luxury. From my experience, it's not luxury.
Thank you for clearing up some of the misconceptions, both of you, in the area of asylum seeker accommodation. Continuing on this theme of myths in the mainstream media, we want to look at some of the most common misconceptions that contribute to the healthcare injustices faced by female asylum seekers. So the next one we want to tackle is this idea that all asylum seekers coming here are men, the "they're all men" myth.
While the majority of asylum seekers arriving in the UK are men, there are still thousands of women arriving each year, yet almost none of the news coverage mentions or includes them. Kim, do you feel the experiences of female asylum seekers like yourself get enough attention in the media?
Not really. Honestly, not really, because it's true that they'll be showing like videos of men on the television that are crossing the channels, that are doing that. But from a woman's perspective, the way they're saying, oh, it's only men. No, there's women and children that come and seek asylum as well. As for me, when we seeked asylum, it was an all-female group, but that media coverage, it wasn't there. I've been to events where there's more women. You see, when there's more women, there's loads of women and children that are there seeking asylum. So I think it's just a myth about only men seeking asylum.
Judith, do you see any problems arising from the very male-dominated nature of coverage of asylum seekers?
I think it's important we see all refugees as individuals and not a sort of amorphous mass. And I think that actually the young men and the men who've come here often experience sort of negative coverage as a result of that. People are referred to as hanging around, loitering, that kind of thing. It's very difficult for people to actually tell their stories, male or female. I think there are additional difficulties for women. Lots of the women that we work with in the asylum system have experienced violence, sexual violence. They need to concentrate on recovering from those experiences and battling the asylum system. So we can understand why the stories are difficult to tell, they're difficult to hear. But we've seen from Kim's example that actually, given the right support, lots of women don't want to be seen as victims. They do actually want to recover, build their lives again and participate in society. And so it's really important that we're able to help, jointly responsible for sort of bringing those stories to the public eye, really, because I think telling those individual stories does help the public to understand the policy.
Thank you so much. And another myth that we want to look at is probably the main one that runs through all of these topics we've been talking about here today, which is that the myth that migrants are all coming here for free healthcare. Here's a report that appeared over the past few months in GB News, The Telegraph, Talk TV and LBC. GB News headlined the report, "Absolutely shocking. NHS blasted as migrants jump queue at A&E and receive priority services." The Telegraph went for "Inside the priority NHS services for migrants." GB News, again, went for "Fury as asylum seekers handed preferential medical treatment over Britons facing soaring waiting times, broken Britain." These incredibly misleading, outraged reports revealed that a scheme known as 987 Inclusion Health allows undocumented migrants to bypass standard A&E waiting times at centres.
Now, in reality, this scheme, which is not, by the way, NHS-wide, but exclusive to one NHS trust in London, It's designed to cater to people who specifically cannot cope with long waiting times because of various social or psychological circumstances and will therefore probably not seek medical care at all as a result of them. This might be, for example, asylum seekers, appealing decisions who have insecure documentation, whose movements are monitored, who may not know where they'll be for very long. They will not get priority over people who will die if they have to wait longer. And also, it's not just for vulnerable migrants. Inclusion health is an umbrella term used to describe people who are socially excluded or who experience interacting risk factors for poor health. For example, stigma, discrimination, poverty, violence, complex trauma. These can lead to people avoiding future contact with NHS services, and that's something believed by researchers to contribute to significantly poorer health outcomes and earlier deaths among people in the identified groups. Basically, this is not a priority migrant service, as the Telegraph called it. It's a correction service that also extends to homeless people, people struggling with drug and alcohol misuse, and it's based on evidence of health inequality, something asylum seekers, on the contrary to being privileged in, are actually exceptionally vulnerable to. Judith, could you just give us an overview about the facts of asylum seeker access to healthcare in the UK? How does it work?
Well, I think there's several factors. I mean, primary healthcare, so access to your GP and midwifery services, will be free at the point of access as it is to everyone. And that is the most efficient way of delivering healthcare. The problem is that rules are misunderstood. People move around, not of their own volition, as we've heard from Kim's story. Being moved multiple times might mean you have to re-register with GPs each time. If it's temporary accommodation, you might not be encouraged to register with the GP. So I think that what happened, and then women and other people who are fearing charges will often not present until it's an emergency. I mean, we know of women who don't seek any help at all until they're in labour. So I think that one of the things that we need to think about is the mismatch between what people are eligible for and what's actually happening in practice.
Absolutely. And, this idea of free healthcare in inverted commas is just one example of national media liking to focus on the pull factor, i.e. why people are coming here to the UK, rather than the push factor, why people are leaving their home countries when they tell the story of migration flows. Kim, you mentioned a little bit about your journey earlier, but can you help us to fill in some of the gaps and help us to understand, as far as you're comfortable, why and how you came to be in the UK and whether the UK's healthcare system was a factor in your decision to claim asylum in the UK?
I'm from Zimbabwe originally. So we were doing a political play pointing out the things that the government are doing, the unfairness. The government in my country, they did not like that. The police, they did not like that. Most people, they get prosecuted for doing that. You cannot face the government and say, oh, this is what you're doing, this is wrong. This is inhuman. It's the government's way or the police way or nobody's way. I came to the UK 2017 on tour doing a play, and we found out that we cannot go back because the police went to my family looking for us. When I discovered that I'm going to face prosecution, that's when we had to seek asylum in the UK. I left my son, by that time he was 5, but I couldn't go back. I know how the police are there, how the prison system is. I was like, okay, the UK can protect us from being prosecuted. Mind you, when we are applying for visas, we already pay an NHS charge. So it's not to say I decided, oh, there's better care. We are coming for free medication. No, I didn't even know that there was better care. Me, I only knew that circumstances couldn't allow me to go back. It's not like I want the good healthcare of the UK. I was just there to do what I was passionate about.
Judith, I think something that people in the UK are concerned about when they look at the state of the NHS and how much it is struggling with funding issues right now, people are concerned about the cost of supporting asylum seekers who are not at that point of time in their life paying taxes into the system. How is it, or could it be sustainable to provide free healthcare to asylum seekers. What would you say to people who are concerned about that?
I think it's important to point out that asylum seekers aren't allowed to work until there's been a long delay on their application. Not all asylum seekers will be able to work, due to the recovery from experiences that they've had in their home countries and on the journey here. But many want to, and many come with skills and professions and want to contribute. I think also the length of time that asylum decisions are taking, and that's due to a range of issues, including some deliberate halting of decision making. But it's certainly not due to the high numbers that we have in this country. If you look across the world, we don't take very many people into our asylum system, and we really could cope if it was run well. So I think a combination of making sure that decisions are right first time, shouldn't be done really, really quickly, and a support system needs to acknowledge that some people will be in it for some time, therefore allow people to work, allow them to live in the community. Going back to the hotel issue, most of us like to stay in a hotel as a break from reality. For these people in the asylum system, this is their reality, and that's a very, very different experience. People who are catering for themselves, living in their own accommodation, albeit often shared, usually feel that they have a bit more agency over their lives, particularly when they're able to cook for their children, etc. Hotels is a very, very expensive way of supporting people. So, we have a system that's quite dysfunctional, even though the aim of it is to provide people with international protection if they need it. Again, the health service, if we make sure that people are not deterred from seeking help, I really want to emphasize how the fear that Kim talked about is really common amongst women with whom we work, and not accessing that antenatal care that's provided throughout the pregnancy means that the cost of the care, as well as the risk to the woman and her baby, it just gets bigger. So we're not doing anybody a good service here. We're not protecting the health service for the people who really need the urgent treatment by providing it early enough, because of the charging and because of the way that people in the asylum system and those reliant on the state due to no fault of their own are treated.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's so important to get the reality of those myths that are so pervasive in our media out to people, so that people have a far greater understanding and empathetic understanding of what people go through in this system. And one thing you mentioned in your answer there was this kind of overinflated sense of the numbers that we are often fed through the media about asylum seekers, flooding the UK, whereas, as you mentioned, relatively we take in far fewer. We have an example of this in an article that came out recently in the Times and the Sunday Times. And they were writing a story about the number of visa applications, yet the image that they used to portray this story was an image of a sinking, overfilled small boat at sea. I mean, this image has absolutely nothing to do with the visa application process.
We want to point this out to listeners because this is a classic example of the mainstream media conflating different types of immigration in a way that obscures public understanding of what is actually driving this immigration. When headlines broke of record levels of migration a year and a half ago, the images of those headlines also showed boat crossings, despite these accounting for less than 10% of the immigration actually being reported on. Asylum immigration actually hadn't even risen that year. It had dropped from the year before. The spike in immigration these reports were actually about came mostly from either visas for healthcare workers or international students who literally fund our impoverished university sector. It is really, really misleading and in some cases, I think, just ignorant on the part of editors and journalists who don't really understand different types of immigration. But it gives people the false impression we are overrun with asylum seekers when they in reality account for less than 0.2% of the population.
And as well as obscuring the numbers, the media often fails to humanise the numbers. But being stuck in the UK's asylum backlog is incredibly painful and difficult for many. Kim, we want to ask you, how long have you been stuck in the asylum system waiting for a decision? And can you just explain to us what it feels like to be in that position?
I seek asylum in the UK, which was a 2-year wait. I got refused. And then COVID came. I didn't know what they were doing or get any information, as if the case was thrown somewhere, only for the case to start again when they discovered I was pregnant. So you give birth again, you wait for another 2 years, only for them to refuse you. It's like, if I go back there, I will face prosecution. Why are you not believing me, or why are you not caring, or something like that? It was so frustrating. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to lie. It was really, really stressful. It's been 8 years in this country waiting for a decision without even seeing my son in person. So it's stressful. It's so annoying, honestly.
Judith, thank you so much for joining us. Before we lose you, is there anything that you would like to plug to our listeners, any way they can help Maternity Action or follow Maternity Action?
Oh, sure. Do keep in touch with us. We work on charging as well as helping other pregnant women. And we've just produced a guide with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists to help them understand their role that they can play when women are charged, either to help them find a resolution or to have the charges lifted if they were incorrectly applied. We also work with the women seeking asylum in hotels. We'd like to see the end to that. We'd like to see no need for us to work in hotels, because pregnant women and those with small babies are not housed there. And of course, we'd like to see the end of charging for maternity services. Thanks very much for the attention that you've given this issue. We're really grateful.
I would love to say, as an asylum seeker, number one, we thank the UK for giving us refuge. And thank you for the people that listen to our stories, the people that care, the people that take time to bring change. In those asylum seekers, there's great potential. There's people that can make a change in this world, the people that are not here to just take money from the government, but if they're given that right to work, to study, to do what, you know that, okay, I'll make a great difference. I'll give back to the country that gave me refuge, that accommodated me when I was seeking sanctuary. And I would like to say to everyone, thank you so much. I love you.
We love you too.
That was really beautiful. Thank you so much. That was a great way to end our Media Storm series.